Thanks, Ruby. I don't know what that means today for anyone in this room, so I'll give you a different bio. Good morning, everybody. Songwoman, thank you for your incredible welcome. I always love your prayer and the opportunity to close my eyes and feel your blessing. So thank you for that, and on behalf of everyone here. To the Commissioner, thank you. I couldn't get here last year. I was very disappointed, and it's just been a privilege to be with you all here in the room. I'll acknowledge all of those who've been acknowledged and follow that protocol to save time, because what I want to talk about is the young people who just stood before us, and I want to pay them the respect in sharing my feedback to them and with all of you publicly. But the human side of me, apart from that bio, is I'm also a mother of 3 children, 21, 18, and 25. There you go. I forget the oldest one all the time because he's not at home. And I, unlike the young people who just spoke, I have the privilege to say that I ended a cycle of domestic and family violence with my children, and they had a safe, loving home, which was not my experience growing up as a child. So with that, can I start with the feedback and the articulation shared by Amani, and the truth that she shared and her lived experience, which I could very much relate to. And I wrote here, the articulation of domestic and family violence, it is so not often understood, so simplified by media. Why can't she leave? How can the children remain in that home? But the reality is it becomes your norm. You don't know that you're unsafe, and the cycles of violence that continue, and the average number it takes a woman to leave. Well, in my mother's case, it would have been in the hundreds, and it never happened until right to the very end. So to Amani, and thank you, your advocacy on behalf of young people and the trauma that also systems need to acknowledge and be able to respond to. Your points shared were excellent. Your points around continuous improvement and programs led by young people. Yes, please, bring it on. I will advocate alongside you to my ministerial colleagues, and I couldn't agree more. We have a cluttered and challenging education system, and some of the simplest messages I think could be articulated through our young people's lived experience, and I commend you and congratulate you on your courage to share your story. If I can touch on next to Lily. Have you ever seen a deep policy analysis for my public servants in the room and those who work in government world that I have just seen the articulation of the failures of the family court and family law system? Lily, congratulations. Your focus and your smart advocacy that speaks to a child-centred approach is to be commended, and I know through both the commissioners but also the work that we as a Queensland Government are doing with our lived experience victims panel, of which a report that I look forward to sharing with Lily is coming forward about victim survivors of domestic and family violence, and how the systems alone that are protecting them are in fact causing more trauma and damage. And she articulated that so beautifully with her own experience, and that of the failure to be able to have connection with your brothers. Can I also outline, and I'll share these cards with each of the speakers. Lily, you have put your trauma and passion into purpose with Lily Pilly. So well done, congratulations. I'd love to, through my department, connect with you and learn more about what you're doing there with that work. But these are things that providing this platform, Commissioner, well done. It's incredible, particularly to people like me who are policymakers and legislators, and my team, and many of your team I know, and other advocates who are here. To the 2 young gentlemen, my goodness, what incredible young men we heard from. And can I start, and I wrote 2 lines on both cards. To Caleb and Angus, you are my why. So, as the Minister for Child Safety, and I get to read files and I get to connect with young people. I get to meet with CSOs. I get to sit with the Commissioner and many others. Queensland must do better. We must do better. It is why we called a Commission of Inquiry. And the Commissioner said to me, "How good's this?" I encourage all of you, and I encourage the Youth Summit to submit every speech that you have to the Commission of Inquiry. I invite Caleb and Angus to come and sit with me in my office and my Director General to speak more deeply in regards to your lived experience, your ideas, and many in my department know I spent last week in child safety out at Logan, meeting with child safety service centres and officers. And I met a guidance officer in a school who is 7 years old, a little boy, 7 years old, who spoke of a story of a little boy in residential care, of which I've now spoken to my department to make efforts to move that child into a family-based placement. Because of your existence, Caleb and Angus, and because of your lived experience, because there are far too many Calebs and Anguses out there in Queensland. Too many that are unacceptable to me and should be unacceptable to every Queenslander. But sadly, summits like this don't get reported on the front page of the Courier Mail. People in Queensland don't want to hear about how horrific and traumatising this system has become. So I commend you young men for your leadership, your courage in taking what many could forgive you in taking a different path in life, and for the way you've shaped your own lives. You've taken your own agency and you have taken it forward to share messages with all of us here today. I just wanted to reflect on 2 lines here and the powerful words from Angus. You learn to read tone before words, and that becomes a survival instinct for children. They are powerful words, and grown-ups and carers and policymakers and legislators can learn from that. So those words will stay with me. And to Caleb, I fell apart when no one was looking. And so our systems are built to respond to crisis instead of prevention and early intervention. And your policy ideas and what you shape and the big feat we have ahead of us, which will not be able to be turned around just in my tenure, but will take, I believe, generational change in our state. But I'm committed right through to the next term of government and then beyond for our government to fix the wrongs that we need to. So can I finish with Commissioner? You've taken me by surprise, clearly. Can I thank all of the speakers, to young Ruby and your co-chair here today. Ruby had the privilege of coming and meeting with me, my department, on the back of her contribution last year. It was a powerful contribution. I'm looking forward to doing more work with Ruby in the goal of preventing domestic and family violence, particularly speaking directly to young people. And it's through young people that we find the answers. To my colleague Ariana Doolan, who is our youngest member of the Queensland Parliament, who is here, who is giving up her time because she is a strong advocate for young people. Thank you for being here with me, Ariana, as well. I'm so very proud of the work of the Commission. I'm so very proud of the work that we have embarked upon as a Queensland government. And for these young people, I give you my commitment. My door is always open, and we will do whatever we can and is in my power to change the outcome for other young people like you. Thank you.